I always think it's really funny when you see like Smash Brothers or other fighting games. People always talk about tier lists and they're like, this Pokemon or this character is S tier or A tier, and they don't really categorize like what tiers mean. Does an S tier just mean it's better? Is it graded like, like a grade school grading? Like, is it like a S tier is 100%, A is 90% better than most of the cast? Like, how do they define it? And so I actually think when you make tier lists, what you should be doing is taking the tiers and separating the Pokemon in this case by what they really do and what each tier means. So, for example, for our tier list, for the first tier, the S tier, it's going to have S, and we're going to have all the things like have a S, like S stands for these Pokemon are broken by themselves. These Pokemon are absolutely busted like by themselves. For the A tier, we'll have Pokemon that are Archetype Venomons. These are Pokemon that define a tier 1 team all by themselves, but see, that's a very different way to categorize it than just saying something standalone broken, because Pokemon can, still define an archetype, while being standalone broken, but these are Pokemon you can also just like splash into the team. So it's obvious with this exact wording that these Pokemon are better than these Pokemon, because a Pokemon that can do this would also just be able to do this. Does that make sense? So going in and adding a little bit more definition to what each tier really stands for is really important. And that's my personal opinion on how tier lists should be working. But again, we're going to be starting off with the S tier, which is the numero uno best in the game. It's going to stand for standalone broken Pokemon, things that can be splashed into any team and can completely carry games all by themselves. After that, it's Pokemon that help define a specific archetype that I would categorize as like a tier 1 archetype. So if you want to be playing Trick Room, you should be playing this Pokemon. If you want to be playing this playstyle, you need to have this Pokemon, and it's that Pokemon that does all the work and all the hard carrying in that type of archetype. You're gonna make like a spreadsheet. You'll see what we do. After that, the B tier, which is Pokemon that are very, very bulky, Pokemon that do their job correctly, but instead of just like sweeping the game like things, in the standalone broken tier that can just win the games by themselves, these Pokemon, their job is to try and wall those standalone Pokemon and make it so you play the long game and elongate the game and make correct plays through correct defensive, positioning and things like that. So after that, the next tier would be, the C tier, where things kind of just come up a little bit short. So things that are very similar, or maybe like budget versions of things in the S tier or A tier, things that do their one job really well, but have a ton of other bad aspects where they kind of just come up a little bit short. So C tier, these are definitely still usable things. All these Pokemon on this whole list are actually still super usable, but these, like, there's not really much of a reason to use these when things in the A and S tier still exist. And after that, there's 2 more tiers. There is the don't try these at home, which, unlike the C tier, which have like a really shining, great, almost S tier redeeming quality about them, like they do their one job really, really well. If anything, the C tier Pokemon that are excel in like one matchup, and that's about it. These D tier mons don't really excel in any matchup, and unfortunately, these D tier mons have the same weaknesses as Pokemon in the A and S tier. So people that are trying to beat Pokemon that are better than them end up beating these Pokemon by default. So don't try these ones at home. And last but not least is the feels bad man tier of Pokemon that just are not very good in this format. Very similar to the D tier, but I would almost say with even more weaknesses. So like I said, that is basically how this whole tier list is going to go. I'm excited to make this work today. I've been working on this tier list for a while, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's definitely a really cool way to look at a tier list instead of just saying like, all right, here's the ranking, and that's how it goes. I think that like this goes a lot more in depth and gives you guys a lot more context behind why certain Pokemon are actually better than others. Only S tier, Zashian, and Calyrex? So like, why would you think that though? I'm curious. I'm curious as to why you think that. Because again, if I defined S tier as standalone broken, are those Pokemon standalone broken? If so, what makes them standalone broken? Like, what makes those Pokemon good enough to be put... What I mean by standalone broken, those Pokemon can be put in any team, in any situation, and be good, and be the correct choice. Like, you're always correct by using this Pokemon. And I want to give some context here. We're only counting restrictive mons. People are saying, like, Toxtricity, Toxicroak, Serena, Incineroar. Those aren't on this list. This is just restrictive mons. Calyrex needs buddies. You're correct. Calyrex does need buddies. So Calyrex, I don't want to get ahead of myself, would fit much more into a meta-defining archetype mon than a standalone broken mon. So you see, the context is key in this situation. We're starting off with the standalone broken tier. These are Pokemon, like I said, that are the correct choice when building a team. Whenever you're thinking like, man, I want to play some VGC, what Pokemon should I build around? You're correct in building around these Pokemon, or if you have like another core of like Pokemon that aren't restricted you want to build around, just throwing one of these into your team is always the correct choice. There's never a situation where you wouldn't want one of these Pokemon in your team, ever, in my opinion. No matter what, you always want one of these things in the team. The things that these Pokemon bring to the table greatly outweigh any detriments they would add. So, for example, obviously Zashian's going to be in here. Zashian has a weakness to ground and fire. So those weaknesses to ground and fire would never stop you from wanting a Zashian because it brings so much more to the table both offensively and defensively. So let's just get right into it. This is the S tier. There's only 3 Pokemon in it. It is always correct, in my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, as someone who is undefeated champion, first place tournament winner. Why do you think I have this as the background? These 3 are the best restricteds in the game. All 3 of them can be played in so many different ways that force your opponent in the team preview to respect multiple options that you as the player who are using these Pokemon do not need to use. For example, let's take a look at 3 different teams that each 3 of these Pokemon use. If I were to build a Kyogre team, a Kyogre team would have something like Kyogre, Tornadus with speed control, a redirector like an Indeedee or maybe an Amoonguss, and then maybe something like a Serena to stop people from going for Fake Out. So that is the Kyogre itself with speed control, Fake Out control, and redirection. Now, the only way to like guarantee stop a Kyogre is to like wide guard, right? That's pretty much how you beat Kyogre. So that can be feinted by a lot of the Pokemon that get Fake Out, which, you know, you can add those Pokemon in your team. You can also add another Fake Out user to make it so your Fake Out tier has a higher Fake Out speed tier over them, so you can Fake Out them before they fake you out. And all of those things, you basically have to pick which one of those things your opponent is leading within the team preview, because a lot of Ogre teams have all of those options. All the things that beat an Ogre with Tailwind, Redirection, Fake Out support, all those things, also just lose if the player that's using Ogre decides to be Scarf Ogre. Right? So there's like 15 different scenarios. I've actually made a video on YouTube talking about oppressive team building, talking about exclusively restricted formats, talking about exclusively Kyogre teams, and saying that if you like ever basically want to win, forcing your opponent to play a matchup roulette where they have to guess what your lead is when you're playing Kyogre, you're always playing correctly if you're bringing Kyogre, if that makes sense. The amount of liberties you get as the Kyogre player far outweigh any sort of negative things that would happen for you bringing this Pokemon. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. If it doesn't make a little bit of sense, think about letting me know. Kyogre Zacian, I probably wouldn't even run Zacian. I'd probably run Kyogre Xerneas. Because Xerneas, let's take a look at Xerneas next actually. The thing about Xerneas is one of those Pokemon that makes every single turn of the game the most important turn of the game, because if Xerneas is able to steal a Geomancy through the same ways Kyogre gets it, Tailwind, Fake Out protection, redirection, / heavy aggressive Fake Out speed tiering, if Xerneas is able to utilize one of those tools correctly, get off a Geomancy, you will win the game. You will basically win the game. It's one of those things that people could say like, well, you could just roar the Xerneas. It's like, cool, you know, you had to soak like a Moonblast with your Sim, which like you can't use an Assault Vest and roar at the same time, so you're kind of boned. And if Xerneas just clicks the right buttons, it doesn't matter if you actually got the roar off, because Xerneas probably KO'd one of your Pokemon for it. And if Xerneas got a KO on one of your mons, even if it loses the Geomancy, it's still a Xerneas, and if the Xerneas is built correctly EV-wise, it's still something that is going to be able to trade effectively versus 90% of the other Ubers in the game. Xerneas doesn't need Geomancy. It would still probably be in the A tier, even if it didn't have Geomancy. That's how good this Pokemon is. Fairy Aura is a very, very good ability, and very similar to Kyogre. Yo, the hero of the game, thank you so much for gifting a sub. I did see that. Thank you so much. Hopefully, you're having a great time. Xerneas is one of those Pokemon that luxuries that you get for being a Xerneas player heavily outweigh any weaknesses you may have to something like Zashian. Yeah, no more Prankster Haze, right? That's one of the things. And the thing is, Xerneas forces your opponent to go with that Haze option. Do you remember in yesterday's tournament, how, well, maybe this isn't the best example, but basically, Xerneas forces your opponent to bring a lot of tools to not automatically lose to it. And you know what? You don't really have to use your Xerneas as your lead. That's the luxury in playing Xerneas. That's what Xerneas brings to the table. It forces your opponent to have Roar users, Haze users, and all these different things to beat Xerneas, and they're like, cool, you know I'm just going to roll you with my Lando, right? And that's what always happens. Xerneas is a really, really cool mon, and unfortunately hasn't won a World Championships yet, but that doesn't mean it's not one of those Pokemon that like dominates and controls and gets the meta built around it, while a meta is forming. So I think Xerneas is very, very good. I guess we're going to look at Zashian next. Zashian, I already talked a little bit about it. It has weaknesses to fire and ground. We're starting to see a lot more things like Volcarona, Incineroar, and, the Landorus with, like, the special attacker Sheer Force Landorus, just because Zashian is so popular. And I think those are great Pokemon for checking Zashian. I definitely think those things are worth checking Zashian. BK Yank dropping the big 14-month sub. Thank you, my friend. 14-month sub. I think those are all great checks for Zashian. And you know what? Those things do not technically stop a Zashian from just still winning the game. You can use things like screens to make it so they don't KO you. You can use things like more speed control to, make it so the Landorus, for example, even if it's like a Scarf Landorus, if you're Tailwind Zashian, you're going to outspeed. If you have Fake Out control, you're able to Fake Out the Landorus to stop even Sash sets to be able to punch with Zashian. Also, you saw the other day, I was using like a Inteleon team to start checking those things like Volcarona, Incineroar, and Landorus, which are so good against Zashian. So there are definitely techs, but the moral of the story is Zashian's really good, and even in bad matchups, it's one of those Pokemon that still thrives. Steel Fairy is one of the most defensive and offensive typings in the game. So even in resisted matchups where you're like, damn, I have to Behemoth Blade and that's not very effective, you're still going to two-shot them because you're a Zashian. The A tier. So these are the Archetype Metamons. The Archetype Metamons. So these are Pokemon who have, I would say, Tier 1 team archetypes built around them. But they're a little bit different from these standalone mons, because you can't just, like, put a Groudon in any team. You really can't. You kind of can put a Shadow Rider in every team, but there's so many techs for Shadow Rider that you actually need to have the correct teammates to support a Shadow Rider. And Groudon, like, these are Pokemon that are very, very good, but they require just a little bit more babysitting. But they're also a lot better than a lot of the other Pokemon that are restricted. So I think that all three of these are really good. Again, all three of these things, I just want to say, are ordered. Like, all of these are totally in order. So I would say Kyogre's the best, then Zashian, then Xerneas, then Shadow Rider, then Ice Rider, then Groudon. All of these are completely ordered within their tiers. And I think Shadow Rider is one of those Pokemon that's really annoying to play against, because basically Shadow Rider is the, Scarf Lele equivalent of this format. People trying to grind the game out really quickly. It can move with Life Over Sash. Again, generally when you're playing Shadow Rider, you want to pair it with like an Entity to not only give it the Psychic Terrain so we can go for Expanding Force, but it's very, very solid redirection. So Shadow Rider is one of those Pokemon that actually is going to dictate a lot of the meta, and one of the reasons why a lot of the Pokemon that are low on the tier list are so low on the tier list, because everyone's packing Snarl, because it plays through the Entity, right? Everyone's packing, you're starting to see a lot more Payback Serena, you're starting to see a lot more, I was using Brutal Swing Scarf Lando for the first, 2 tournaments that I top cut this format. Like, you're starting to see really, really weird tech, because Shadow Rider has the 4 times weakness to Dark and Ghost, so there's a lot of things that can just invalidate it from existing, and since it is such a good, popular Pokemon, a lot of people are trying to steal those matchups. So Shadow Rider is great, but it's definitely not S tier. It requires a little bit more babysitting and correct team positioning, but it's still super good. I have used it before. I like it a lot. And I would say that I might want to eventually judge Calyrex a little bit higher. I think as the format goes on, I think Shadow Rider usage is going to fall lower and lower once people realize that you can just set like a light screen and ignore the thing, which is what they did in Series 8. But yeah, I do think that Ice Rider is also, what's moving to Ice Rider is very, very good. This is the de facto Pokemon that you want to use if you're playing Trick Room, because it is bulky enough both on the physical and defensive side to live through even Shadow Rider moves. So, like you saw, I was using Psychic Seed, Shadow Rider, or Ice Rider the other day. There's so much things that this thing actually brings to the table, and the reason why these Pokemon are so much higher than stuff like Dialga and Palkia is, yeah, they still get the moves that make them succeed, but then they also have like AoE 130 base moves that can't miss. So they're like a mix of like Dialga, Palkia, and Kyogre, Groudon. Like, imagine if Kyogre and Groudon could Trick Room. That's what like an Ice Rider is, and that's kind of broken. That's like kind of really broken. So I think Ice Rider just brings a lot to the table. You kind of need Wide Guard to beat it. If it literally encapsulates like what a Sunroom matchup would be. So I think it's really, really fun to use. And I think as the meta develops, if we were to take like a look back at like the number one used mons, Calyrex has a pretty decent matchup versus a lot of these. Like obviously Ogre can do a lot, but if you're using like a special defensive like Psychic Seed set, you just go Redirect Trick Room against Ogre. And then from there, like Glacial Lance actually does a lot. High Horsepower / Seed Bomb would be able to KO the Ogre, depending on how you're going to play it. You can High Horsepower Zashian, Glacial Lance is a 2-shot, potentially even a 1-shot off a Helping Hand onto a Xerneas. So like Calyrex have a great matchup versus these, but it does require a little bit more babysitting. And like I said, it's not standalone broken. It requires the use of teammates to do better. So yeah, double ability on the riders. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely really important. And similar to Ice Rider, Groudon actually fulfills like a similar role in that, yes, it has that big all three of these Pokemon have huge AoE moves because AoE moves are so much better in these restricted formats. Groudon, though, instead of like being able to set speed control with like Tailwind and things like that, or Trick Room or anything, it basically is just really, really bulky. And Groudon brings the Sun. And why is Sun good? I don't know, because Groudon's good against all three of these things. You can set the Sun versus Ogre, which is amazing. You can wall the Zashian and one-shot it with P-Blades, which is amazing. Or you can roar the Xerneas after it Geos, which is amazing. Slash just 2-shot with P-Blades. So Groudon, as the meta develops, you're only going to see more and more and more Groudon. That is how these formats go. Groudon is the Uber of choice for the old good guard players. I love Groudon. Like, we saw Groudon in the finals of the Series 8 Players Cup as well, after it didn't really see a ton of play all season. I think Groudon's great. Yeah, Heat Crash is able to be used in the Sun now. It doesn't really stab Heat Crash, but since there's no Dynamax, you can use Heat Crash now, which is pretty cool. I love Groudon. I think it's really good. Omax, thank you for the sub. 23 months. 23 months. Thank you. Holy moly. Popping it up with some subs up. Subs up. Yeah, we take those. Yeah, I think Groudon's really good. A lot of people are probably going to say this is an incorrect place to put Groudon on the tier list, that I'm putting it way too high. But just remember, when Groudon like wins the Series 10 Players Cup equivalent, that maybe I should have put it in the S tier, because Groudon is a check to Ogre. And we're gonna get to a point with Ogre. Ogre is like basically Ogre is one of those Pokemon. How do I explain this? Everyone runs Ogre until nobody runs Ogre, right? Because Ogre is one of those Pokemon that you're not punished that hard for going into the mirror. Like, the Ogre mirror is enjoyable for both players, and it's a skill matchup a lot of the time. It's very, very highly based on speed control, not necessarily speed ties, even though you're both using Ogre. It's based a lot of like speed control and positioning, so it's a fun matchup. So you're not really ever punished for going Ogre against, like, Ogre technically can beat all 6 of these Pokemon, which is why Ogre is number 1. But Groudon has the potential to do stuff against Ogre, because not only does Groudon come in and take away the rain, it makes it sunny, it still takes water damage, but the things you surround a Groudon with, like Lilligant, Venusaur, things like that, those are Pokemon that can threaten a lot of these things. Sleep Powder is good for all 6 of these Pokemon. Venusaur gets it, and Venusaur gets Earth Power now, Venusaur gets Weather Ball, so many cool things, and I definitely think that Groudon has potential to be really, really good in this format. We just gotta wait it out and let the meta develop. Remember, the format hasn't even really come out yet, and I do think that, like, Groudon's one of those restricteds that still requires a ton of respect, but enables its teammates even further. You're going to see like other things like Zamazenta, for example. It's a support restricted. That's not normally good. You don't want your restricted mon to be helping out its teammates, because like the restricted is supposed to be the hard carry, because they're the reason you're running it. They're the reason you want to do the big damage reduction, stuff like that. And so Groudon does that on accident just because of its ability. Its ability does all the heavy lifting for its teammates to win the game. So things like Cherrim Groudon, Venusaur Groudon, Lilligant Groudon, those are all really, really cool comps. Like, for example, if I were to go Lilligant Groudon, and you were to go like freaking Shadow Rider and literally anything, I could just soak that damage, and I could use like a Sash teammate, and I can just go double AoE, Shadow Rider gone, still have my Groudon, you've lost the game. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And so stuff like that, people just have to embrace the Groudon and try to mess with it a little bit, see if they want to use like Citrus Berry sets, Figgy Berry sets, Physical Specials, / like Vested sets. Even Scarf Groudon's usable, so a lot of cool stuff to come from the table from Groudon. The B tier is where the bulky Pokemon go, right? That's basically how we're describing all these tiers. I think analyzing like what each tier really means and putting them in their own tier like that is really important. Yeah, B tier is bulky, you're right. B tier is bulky, not C. Yeah, we're just skipping the B tier because it's boring. B stands for boring, not bulk, right? No, I definitely think that these Pokemon are really, really good. And I didn't just put all the bulky Pokemon here on purpose. I do think bulk in general. Let's take a look at the first two again. These are Pokemon that are better than everything else. These are Pokemon that are better than most things while also defining their archetype. These are the Pokemon that all those things that I just mentioned can't one-shot, which is why they're actually able to hang with those and play a long game based off board positioning. So I think that I think these Pokemon are all really good. Now again, these are all ordered in the tier that I think they're really good. So I would say Palkia is the best, then Yveltal, then Dialga, then Ho-Oh, then Eternatus. I think Eternatus has actually risen up a lot, and I still think Ho-Oh is a little bit better. But basically, like Neve was talking, like why isn't Ho-Oh in the A tier? Literally, what you do against Ho-Oh, if you want to beat Ho-Oh, you can time Ho-Oh. You can time Ho-Oh every single game. You can time Ho-Oh every single game. You can time most of these Pokemon if they're going to be playing for bulk every game. You can start from the start of the game, and you don't see me do that on stream, but like at a tournament level, that is what happens. Like they will steal KOs on those Pokemon's teammates, and Pokemon that are bulky like this, that rely on like pressure and stuff and good board positioning, they don't have the offensive power to take back those KOs on the other support mon. So like if you were to lead like Ho-Oh and Rillaboom, cool, I'm gonna nuke your Rillaboom out of existence, take a long time on each turn, and just chill, right? I'm just gonna, so that's why Ho-Oh's not A tier, right? It loses to the timer. So you could have the best Pokemon in the world, and it could never lose, but it can never win either, right? That's why these Pokemon aren't a little bit higher. I think Palkia is actually almost good enough to be in the A tier, I would say. And I actually think Palkia is going to make a push for that, because I actually think Palkia is the numero uno Pokemon that got the biggest buff from them removing Dynamax. Palkia is so bulky, guys. It's water dragon typing is amazing. Only 2 weaknesses to Dragon and Fairy, which can definitely be mitigated with the correct typing. And I think that people used to have to Dynamax their other Pokemon to be able to one-shot non-max Palkias. Because like if Palkia wanted a Trick Room, they would max and one-shot your Palkia. Can't do that anymore. They have to double into the Palkia, which means Palkia can have a Fake-Out/Redirection user, guarantee get up the Trick Room, and then just not die and have great stab moves. And the thing is Palkia, right? Palkia, what is it? Like checks all these Pokemon. Palkia checks Ogre hard. Zashian has to use Play Rough, which like we'll talk about that in a little bit. It doesn't really check Zern, but Zern doesn't want to eat like a Hydro Pump either. And then where's the other tier? Sorry. Like this tier. Like Palkia, those Pokemon don't do shit to a Palkia. Palkia comes in hot versus all those. So I actually think like Palkia is a Pokemon that actually brings a lot to the table. And I'm excited to see more Palkia play. I think it can be built with like the, I think it's like Illustrious Orb, berry sets, leftover sets, assault vest sets, so many things that Palkia brings to the table. You prefer Kingdra because of Swift Swim? Yeah, but Kingdra can't use Trick Room, right? Like you cannot use Trick Room with Kingdra. It's a Trick Room mon. It's a Trick Room thing. So that's why it's in the bulky tier. It's made to soak damage, apply its correct speed control, and then from there it allows its teammates and itself to like just exude a ton of damage. Very similar to how we played Dialga yesterday when we got first place. I think it's really, really good. I think the only thing making Dialga a little bit lower than Palkia is its weakness to ground and fighting, which are two super, super common types, preferably the ground. You could totally build a fast Palkia, but the thing is, it's like, that's the good thing about Palkia, is you can do all those things. You don't have to play it a certain way, and it just kind of never dies. So it's really, really good. I also think like Palkia is probably the best Pokemon to still pair with Comfey if you wanted to go for like a weakness policy set. So you could enable it that way too. Give yourself a secondary Trick Room user / Ally Switch user to get out of those Dragon super effective moves like an Ally Switch. So I think Palkia brings a lot to the table. But yeah, Dialga has a big ground weakness, so that's one of the reasons why it's just a little bit lower. Yveltal, a lot of people put Yveltal in their A tiers, and I think that Yveltal is one of those Pokemon that can be very good, but it's not great until a meta is already developed, and we don't actually know if this meta is going to be that great for Yveltal, because a lot of people like to use vested Yveltal, and with the meta being so centralized over Fake Out, it's kind of hard to use it, just because people can always cycle in Fake Out users. Yeah, it has a great matchup versus things like Rillaboom, decent matchup sometimes versus Incineroar, but if you wanted to pair Serena in your team to make it so you don't, you don't get Fake Outed, those both share ice weaknesses, so it starts adding, you basically can't have any other ice weaknesses in your team, which cuts you from winning like Lando, which you would normally want to run. Otherwise, that's too much ice weakness, you just start losing to Icy Wind mons. So Yveltal's in a little bit of a weird spot right now, to where like the meta that you would want to counter with it is one that's not really a good matchup for it. And it's obviously not that great for CERN. You're starting to see more Zashians with Behemoth Blade. Ogre still gives it a lot of problems. There has to be the perfect time and place for Yveltal. And right now we're just not there yet. So it's still in the bulk tier. But that's also how I kind of like to play Yveltal. I like to play a little bit more bulky. You know, who knows? We might see better Yveltals as the time goes on. But I think it was a better Pokemon with maxing. Because you could Dynamax in Airstream to gain that control. And then, like, you're super bulky, and then you have fast roosts and things like that, which could be really nice, and it just doesn't have that right now. After that, Ho-Oh, we already talked about Ho-Oh, and Ichneus is going to fall in the same category. Yeah, they both have Pressure Stall, and Pressure is really, really good in this format. Ho-Oh also gets Regenerate, which is really nice, but they lose the time. Good players would just time them. Same thing against, like, Chansey. Like, everyone talks about how broken Chansey is. Like, you can just time that thing. It's pretty good. So, the C-tier Pokemon are Pokemon that have really, really good redeeming qualities. Like, things that they do better than even Pokemon in the A or S tier. But, in coming with that, they have a lot of places where they just fall short. So, things like Kyogre, Zashian, and Xerneas, you're afforded so many luxuries playing those Pokemon. Your offensive capabilities for proactive play cover up for the couple matchups you might be kind of weak in. With these Pokemon, the cool thing that they do doesn't really make up for the fact that they lose to almost everything else. And a lot of these things, this is where we're going to start seeing Pokemon get kind of checked by things that, like, low-key are being made to tech other things. So, for example, we have, like, a Dustman and Solgaleo. The reason why Dustman and Solgaleo can't really be that good is because they have very similar typing to Zashian. And if people are teching to beat Zashian, they're by proxy beating your Solgaleo and your Dustman and your Reshiram and your Zenta. Does that kind of make sense? If they're teching to beat Shadow Rider, they're going to start accidentally beating your Mewtwo. But I do think that we should talk a little bit about each one of these Pokemon's redeeming qualities and what they do bring to a team. So Dustman, for example, it gets Prism Armor, which mitigates the damage of super effective moves. So yes, you can take a lot of super effective moves a little bit better than things like Solgaleo and Zashian because you reduce the damage. And that's great. But then the problem with this thing is it has very low offensive power. And unlike Solgaleo and Zashian, Zashian gets a +1 attack when it comes in from its sword, Intrepid Sword. Dustman is super susceptible to Intimidate. Literally 1 Intimidate, and this thing is like a wet noodle. Has a terrible matchup versus Incineroar. Like, terrible matchup. Like, fake out bad, and, like, you could Stone Edge it, but, like, you're already intimidated, and it's not great at all. It's very, very bad matchup, because it usually uses Steel and Psychic attacks. So, I think Dustman is super, super cool. I think if you're looking for a Trick Room setter that isn't Ice Rider, or if you're looking for a Trick Room setter that says, I need Trick Room up, if there's, like, a way to enable teammates to, like, break the meta, like, Dustman is the one to go to, because it will not die. It will not die to anything. There's not a single Pokemon on this list, I think, that one-shots Dustman if it's built bulky, which is very, very cool. No other Pokemon on the list can basically say that. And so that's great. Like, and it has a decent matchup versus Xerneas, but it has, like, almost no offensive power. And if you want to run things like Morning Sun to make it so you have that longevity, you just get Intimidate, Cycled, Spam, Fake Out, and it's a slow loss. But I think it's still better than a lot of the other Pokemon on the list. I still think there's a lot of cool things about Dustman. See that Coach and Support, Mineshadow, that's a little bit too combo-based, right? That's a little bit too combo-based. I was trying to use that with Solgaleo, which is an even better version of that, and it was just super, super hard. Congrats on Rank 1 having an awesome channel. Yo, thank you. 3 months, welcome to the Caterpie Club. Welcome. Yeah, I still rank Dustman a lot higher than others, and personally, if we were to actually rank, like, all the Pokemon on the list, which we will at the very end, Dustman's probably my favorite restricted to play with over the past 2 or 3 years, just because I feel like I always have an out with Dustman if I build it correctly, which is something that you can't say. Like, Dustman's one of the few Pokemon that you can have it come from behind win, making your opponent having to play correctly, which I do like that, but it's very hard to use it, and it's going to take a little bit more, like, going back to the drawing board to play it correctly. Does it get an Infestation type move? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I think with Dustman, you have to use things like Haze, which you should just be using a Haze user, or something like a Galarian Slowking. I'm actually really working, that's like the next big team I'm working on, to be able to get rid of those Intimidate drops, and maybe even running Stone Edge on my Duskmane so I can check in Sins on switch-ins. But again, like, why would you want to ever do that when you could just run a Zashian, right? Or just run Special Dustman. You're right, that's not even bad. That's not even bad. But, like, why wouldn't you just run a Zashian? That's one of the reasons why it comes up a little bit short. Solgaleo, very similar to Zashian, in that, yeah, it can't really be intimidated. Zashian can be intimidated, but when you intimidate it, it goes down to a neutral base 170 attack bond, so it doesn't matter. Solgaleo can't be intimidated, but it's not super fast. It's slower than even the base 100, so something like a Charizard could check a Solgaleo. Just throwing that out there. And like Volcarona, check Solgaleo. That's kind of nuts, right? It does get Trick Room, it does get Wide Guard. So those are things that it does bring to the table. I also really like Safety Goggle sets to be able to play around Rage Powder users and hit those Xerneas super hard. Great matchup versus Xerneas. Solid Trick Room, like off-meta Tankmon that can be a little bit supporty with Wide Guard if it needs to. But again, it comes up a little bit short in that it loses to everything that's trying to check Zashian. After that, Reshiram. Reshiram's like a budget Ho-Oh. Right? It actually, the Ho-Oh team I played the other day that had like, the Serena and the Intelli and everything, that was supposed to be built with a Reshiram, because I think Reshiram's actually pretty good. Reshiram takes neutral damage from Kyogre, neutral damage from Xerneas, great matchup for Zashian, and it's great. Reshiram is actually like a really, really good Pokemon versus a lot of the Pokemon in, what tier is it? All the other tiers. Reshiram's good. Reshiram's good versus a lot of the Pokemon in this tier. Groudon, maybe not, but like you outspeed the Groudon, and Groudon doesn't resist fire moves, so if they're not vested, they get one-shotted by Blue Flare in the Sun, so they set that for you. But yeah, I like Reshiram a lot. Reshiram, for those of you guys that I've talked about, it's my favorite restricted, and I think that Reshiram will probably raise up to the top of the C tier by the end, just because it brings so much to the table. It just requires a lot of babysitting, and it loses to not restricted Pokemon like Landorus, for example. It's very susceptible to Fake Out. It's a little bit more cheesy, where sometimes you want to run like a Vest, Scarf, Specs, all-in set with Reshiram. You think Reshiram should be higher, has neutral positive match against Big Four, and has massive firepower? Like I said, Reshiram loses to not restricted Mons, which is something that like Kyogre will, other than Rillaboom, will not lose to a not restricted Mon. Like Zashian will not lose. It will beat every not restricted Mon. So will Xerneas, basically. Reshiram can get 1v1 by like a Landorus, who like outspeeds it and can one-shot it with an Earth Power. Right? That's so common right now, too. So everyone's teching Landorus to beat Zashian. Landorus beats the Reshiram. You're in it. Like, I also want to say all these things. I've used all these Pokemon. I've used every single Pokemon on this list at some point. Most of them I've used at actual like regional level events that like I travel all over the country to go to. So when I say something's like not great or it struggles in a specific matchup, like I traveled like hundreds of miles to learn that it struggled with those matchups, right? So Reshiram's my favorite, but it's very hard to use. It's very matchup dependent, and it's a lot of matchup roulette, hoping your opponent just like lucks into a good matchup or doesn't have X, Y, or Z, which, is not very good for competitive play. Like, you shouldn't be putting all your eggs in hoping your opponent is bad. That's not a good way to look at it. Yeah, Battle Legend Reshiram is good, but that's because Dynamax is in there, right? Dynamax completely changes the game. Completely changes it. Like, Reshiram can set its own weather. Reshiram can go for, like, attack drops, and it was one of the best Wormwind users, because you would Wormwind the teammate, not the fairy thing, and then it would never die to a fairy in general, and then you would just be fine, and you'd wall them out. But Reshiram's cool. After that, Mewtwo. Mewtwo, unfortunately, loses the same things that, obviously, check Shadow Rider. Things like Regieleki and Shadow Rider, the meta has just gotten so fast, right? Mewtwo, if we look back like 2016, was totally a viable option, especially because Mewtwo had 2 mega options back then too. But Mewtwo brings a lot to the table. I think I'm always going to rank Mewtwo higher than most people. If you look at any other creators tier list, they're going to put Mewtwo way at the bottom, because basically Mewtwo has about comparable stats to an Alakazam, and it has half of the ability that Shadow Riders have and Ice Riders. It has the Unnerve, but it doesn't have the Grim Neigh boost, right? We already talked about Solgaleo. Yeah, it's right there. Yeah, I think Mewtwo's cool. I think what Mewtwo brings to the table is you have to be very cheesy. But if you have a Scarf Mewtwo set, you have a little bit of bulk in it, make sure you're outspeeding Regielekis. Mewtwo gets super effective coverage moves against literally like every single Pokemon, or potentially the one-shot almost all the Pokemon. Maybe if you have like a Helping Hand boost or like a Weather Steroid boost for something like a Flamethrower or Fire Blast, you can technically cover almost every single restricted with the Mewtwo if you play it correctly or have like Tailwind support, gets access to like Expanding Force. Mewtwo, there's a lot of tools for Mewtwo, which means it's a very solid aggressive option, but it's still really hard to use. And it falls short because it loses to a lot of the things that check Shadow Rider. Endgame Sweeper, that's a good way to put it. Was Lugia mentioned? Lugia is a little bit lower in the list. We'll talk about it. Last on the C tier is Zamazenta. I think Zamazenta is the perfect example of a Pokemon that comes up short. It has almost all the same tools Zashian has, very similar typing, very similar like offensive moves and things like that. But it's one of those Pokemon that, like, similar to the couple of other things that I've said, you don't really want your restricteds to be a support mon. Like, everyone's like, coaching Zamazenta, wide guard Zamazenta. If I'm a person and I'm playing against a Zamazenta, right, or anything, and if I can ever do a turn that says my opponent's restricted doesn't do anything, like if I can use a Pokemon let's say a Rillaboom or like a Torkoal or literally anything. If I can use a Pokemon that's not my restricted and make my opponent's restricted not deal damage and not set up and not do anything impactful that negatively impacts my board, that's a win, because that means my restricted is able to do things. So if I'm able to lock up my opponent's restricted for any number of turns with them not doing anything important, that's a win, right? I don't care if you're giving a coaching boost to your Mineshaw or your Landorus, because like my Zashian will beat your Landorus, or you know what I mean, because Zashian outspeeds Landorus. You get what I mean, right? My restricted will beat your non-restricted mon. I don't care if you give it a coaching boost, right? So Zamazenta, while it's cool, it is not amazing. If there was a dual restricted format, there are definitely arguments for Zamazenta being a lot higher. Similar to Solgaleo. Solgaleo would raise a lot in usage just because that's the good support. Like you would put these Pokemon to support your like S tier mons. But as a standalone restricted with no Dynamax, I just think Zamazenta falls a little bit short, and which is why it's at the bottom of the comes up short tier. Pokemon were in the B tier. The Pokemon that were in the B tier were these. So let's review all our tiers. So all of our tiers, this is the S tier, standalone broken Pokemon. This is the A tier, the archetype defining Metamons. This is the B tier, where we put the bulky things that all get timered, slash like, you know, crit and outplayed. And then we have the C tier, where things they have redeeming qualities for sure, but they kind of fall short because their weaknesses start to like outvalue the strengths they bring to the table. So let's look at the next one, the D tier, where we say don't try these at home. So here's the D tier, and these are all Pokemon that have like major defensive flaws while not bringing nearly enough like offensive pressure slash like speed control slash literally anything to the table. Like if we were to compare these Pokemon, you can compare Lunala to a Shadow Rider, where they both have that 4x weakness to like Dark and Ghost. Lugia is comparable to a lot of the things in the B tier, where it's super bulky, it's multi-scale, but it has that electric weakness. It also has Ghost weaknesses and Dark weaknesses, similar to Shadow Rider, so it brings a lot of defensive weaknesses to the table that it doesn't really need and doesn't have the tools to capitalize onto. Zygarde, I've historically said that Garchomp's literally a better Pokemon than this thing, and the problem with Zygarde isn't that like Zygarde's weak or Zygarde is bad, it's that Zygarde needs a very, very, very controlled team of like 5 mons that never change, that have to be built to support it. Like you need Feeny, you need Fake Outs, you need the Heal Pulse users. You have to go all in supporting the Zygarde, and like literally you can do all of that shit and it literally still loses to an Ice Attack or like a Moonblast. Not worth it. You have to go all in to do everything perfectly to play Zygarde. You lose to Zygarde, you lose to literally any Ice Attack, and it's just not worth it. Like just literally for everything by using Zygarde, just use a Garchomp and then throw one of those S tier mons in your team. You're going to do a lot better. Zekrom, I used a lot of Zekrom in Players Cup 4. I thought it was so good in Players Cup 4. And I feel it's underwhelming in this format because Special Zekrom is kind of hard to use without Dynamax, because it can't set its own terrain, which means it can't really go for Rising Force. And you didn't actually get KOs. Like regular Zekrom out of Max doesn't really get KOs on Zashian with Earth Power. You need Max Quake boosted out Earth Power. And now that people kind of know how Zekrom is supposed to be played, like Special Zekrom's not as great. And Physical Zekrom just gets one intimidated and it's useless. And Reshiram, Kyurem White, we tried it. It's bad. It's very bad. But you do have to always respect its ability to be Scarfed. That's the thing. It can always be Scarfed, and it has a little bit higher base speed than things like Kyogre and Groudon. So like a Scarf variant of this thing can outspeed literally every restricted. And if you're using Zashian, you can get Fire Attacked like a Fusion Flare. You can get Blizzarded. You can get Draco Meteored. And, if you lose your restricted to a Scarf Kyurem, it doesn't matter they have a Scarf Kyurem, because Kyurem, they switch it out, switch it right back in, and then they'll melt the rest of your mons. So it's not unusable, but it's very, very hopeful that your opponent's bad. Yeah, Zygarde's like, just give me 10 turns and you will feel my wrath, and then you still lose to an Icy Wind, right? The only set that would be semi-consistent with specs. Yeah, so like Kyurem's just a cheese mon. It's just straight cheese. How do I feel about Counter Mr. Mine? It's pretty good. My use for Zekrom in an Ultra Series was I can Oka your Ogre even at -1. So the thing is, like, that's a good example of how a dual restricted format could work. But in a solo restricted format, Zekrom just kind of shits the bed. Where's Kyurem Black? You'll see. You'll see. But yeah, all these Pokemon, like Lunala, like I just went over it. all these Pokemon have things that they bring to the table. Lunala is like a variant, a more defensive Shadow Rider that can use Wide Guard, can use Trick Room. Pretty good mon, I would say. I'd say it's pretty decent, but it still like gets dumpster by Incineroar, and that doesn't change. Lunala was great in dual restricted format, similar to things like Solgaleo, similar to things like Zamazenta would be if there was like 2 restricted. It's a great Pokemon that requires a lot of things to check it, and when they don't have to check a Xerneas or a Zashian at the same time, and they know that the only thing they have to check is a Lunala, it's super easy to check. I can't message you, I'm streaming, my guy. Lugia, though. Scarf Lunala. I mean, it's not bad. It gets Heat Wave, gets cool moves. Lugia is great. I think Lugia is still really cool and great Pokemon for, like, streaming. But, like, as someone who's played Lugia in, like, official regional tournaments, Lugia is hard to use. And it's a lot more of, like I've talked about, hoping your opponent is bad. Like, if I have Lugia and, like, you're restricted as something like, I don't know. If you're restricted as, like, Solgaleo and I have Lugia, I'm like, yo, we can win. But that's me wishing your restricted was bad. Your restricted is going to be something up here. Or, you know, like your restricted is going to be something in the good tiers, right? It's not going to be a bad restricted. So, like, me hoping that you're bad, you're going to have these. Like, I'm going to go for, like, what does Lugia do against any of these? Turn 1, you lose your multi-scale and get dumpstered by a spout. You take, like, 30% through your multi-scale. Or a Behemoth Blade. They fake out you, break your multi-scale, Behemoth Blade's a one-shot. Xerneas sets up a Geo, next turn, you actually can't catch it. You just can't catch it. It Geo'd and you lost. Let's look at, like, Lugia versus, like, these mons. Shadow Rider, Astral Barrage, you lose. Glacial Lance, you lose. Groudon, I guess maybe I can hope that, like, you're Groudon, but, like, he crashes a lot, and Groudons usually have, like, electric typing teammates to help deal with, like, waters and stuff like that, so, like, you lose to, like, the Regieleki. Lugia loses to Regieleki. That's the thing. Like, that's the moral of the story. Lugia loses to Regieleki. It's hard to use. I think Lugia's cool, though. We'll definitely use a lot of Lugia, I think, as the format evolves. It's a great Pokemon used on stream. It's hilarious. It looks amazing. So, like, don't let me saying Lugia is bad, like, stop you from using it. But, it's hard. We already talked about Zygarde. It's not that great. Zekrom, we talked about it. It just falls a little bit short. And Kyurem, also, we talked about that. So, that's pretty much, they don't try these at home. There's one tier left. Check something. What do you guys think is in the last tier? What do you think the worst Pokemon is? Guys, before we get into the last tier, what do you think the worst restricted is? Now, I'm going to tell you guys, we're not using Cosmog or Cosmogem or whatever. We're not ranking regular Calyrex, and we're not ranking regular Kyurem. We're just not ranking those. Or regular Necrozma. So the last ones we have left are things like Rayquaza, Giratina, Kyurem Black, Dawn Wings, and something else. We're not ranking Cosmog. Mew's not in the format. Am I playing the Dialga team? Maybe. Let's look at it. The worst Pokemon is... And I decided to include both Giratina forms in here. These are feel bad, man. So it should have been Ray, and upon further inspection of Rayquaza, I realized Rayquaza brings a little bit more to the table. I really scrutinized over, like, the last two. Basically, Rayquaza does invalidate a lot of weather control, which is important. But Ray gets it, even though it can't Mega, it gets Dragon's Ascent, which is still super strong and stabbed. And it gets E-Speed. And you know what? It's ass in, like, every situation. But it can be sashed. Sash Ray, Dragon's Ascent, Extreme Speed. Even Vested Ray is actually usable. I would not be surprised if someone actually, like, Top Cut or won one of these ladder tours with a Vested Ray. You could even technically still do Comfey with it, but, like, I wouldn't recommend it. But Ray gets enough stuff to not be the worst thing ever. Has a decent Ogre match unless they're packing Ice Beam, which a lot of them don't anymore. So, it's not ass, but it literally is, like, so slow that it's useless. And, basically, the, Kyurem Black, I'll show you how Kyurem Black, I'll show you why that thing's not great. Where is it? Where is it? Kyurem Black is not great because of these. All of these Pokemon have a pretty good match against Kyurem Black, except for Ogre, but, like, the thing, like, Ogre's surrounded by Pokemon that beat Kyurem Black. It's Zashian and Xerneas, And then like even more so, like a lot of these Pokemon beat Kieran Black as well. So like Kieran Black and one Intimidate. If you get single Intimidated, Kieran Black is donezo wasted. Kieran Black was actually a Pokemon that I thought got a major buff because of Dynamax. If you were Dynamax it paired with Comfey, Pocket Policy, that was super cool. You could also use like that big Ice Attack Freeze Shock as like a really, really big, strong max ice move, which Kieran doesn't have, right? It might get Ice Punch now. I think it might get Dragon Dance now, but those are not good. We'll probably still use it, but it's definitely, its defensive typing is the worst in the game, as far as the restricteds go. I think both Giratinas are also like still really low. Unfortunately, they lose to a lot of the things. They lose to all the things that check all the dragons, and they lose to all the things that check Shadow Rider. I personally like regular Giratina a little bit more because I think pressure is better. You can actually run an item with that thing, and I feel that Giratina's defensive stats suit it better than having to run like a Grisius Orb and go for like the Origin form. Like if Origin form could hold an item, that Pokemon would probably be in like the D or C tier. It'd be an okay Pokemon if it could hold an item. But it has to hold an item that gives it a 1.2 boost to like Ghost and Dragon attacks. And that's just not enough. It's just not enough. Yeah, Giratina works better than Dragapult. It looks better. I like the way Giratina looks. I love the way Giratina looks. But, yeah, they're pretty low. Dawnwings, again, it doesn't get the Wide Guard that Lunala has, and I think Wide Guard is actually what puts Lunala that high in the first place. I think Meteor Beam Dawnwings is still really cool, but it still just gets murdered by, like, an Incineroar. And every team has Incineroar. All these Pokemon, actually, in this list right here, lose to Incineroar or Urshifu or a combo of those. And that's kind of why they're down here. But let's show you the full list. That's the full list. So this is the list, and I really think that like going over what each tier actually stands for is super important. Like I could have moved things around and maybe put something in the B tier or something in the A tier that, like maybe I could have moved Palkia up one, for example, and put Palkia in the A tier because I think Palkia is really good. But I think that like categorizing them by tiers and then putting Pokemon in its own tier, like obviously Palkia is a lot better in my opinion than Yveltal. But if we're gonna keep it if we're gonna separate them by tiers and say like these are the Pokemon you should run in these situations, you know, Palkia obviously is just the king of the B tier, and that's good enough. Yeah, I think it's a solid list. I looked up a couple other tier lists when I started this, and I know that the way I look at the game is definitely a lot different than people like Moxie Boosted and a lot of other players. But I tend to, when I'm team building, I say, what do I want to not lose to? How much respect do I have to give my opponent's potential weeds when building a team? And then from there, do I have the luxury to do what I want? And so, like, I basically rank the tier list off the amount of luxuries you're awarded in the team preview for playing these Pokemon. Like, if I'm reading Kyogre, like I said, you have to respect Tailwind, Redirection, Fake Out, other forms of speed control. All that while also having your own speed control to respect my Kyogre's ability to be Scarfed, which you can't know until the game starts in a best of one. So those are so many things, so many little intricacies that you have to respect from a Kyogre versus like a Kyurem, where you don't have to respect shit, and you're just like, cool, I'm just going to bring my Incineroar. And I'm going to get one Intimidate, I have a Fake Out Lockup, and I resist your base stab move. So it's like having to do all these things to potentially stop an Ogre, and you can't cover all of them, which is why Ogre will always succeed. Or Kyurem, where you don't even have to like play the Incineroar right. You just kind of have to bring it. If you get one Intimidate on the Kyurem, it's dead. It's useless forever. One thing is like Ogre, you say Rillo like beats Ogre, but like Redirection, Serena, Correct Tailwind, like Tornadus is always on a pair, so Tornadus can help KO the Rillo and stuff like that. So, I don't know, that's just how I like to look at the game. And obviously, like, I didn't rank Pokemon that aren't restricted. I didn't rank, like, Amoonguss, Incineroar, Urshifu, all those things, Landorus. But I feel that, like, these are the Pokemon you should be looking at. If you're ever looking for, like, I want to build a VGC Series 10 team. What do I use? Go down the list. Just go down the list. Pick one. Like, you build around Ogre, build around Zashian, build around Xerneas. And, it's kind of how it goes.